All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'll say hello and welcome to our Power Automate Do's and Does webinar. Today we're going to be talking about Power Automate and how it integrates into Tikit. We'll be going through a couple of different examples of varying complexity. My name is Justin Workman. I'm on the customer success team here at Sierson. Part of my role is to deliver services around Tikit. That includes development of Power Automate flows as well as implementing flows and automations to our customers. And I'm joined by Adam, who I'm sure most of you may recognize. He's our director of product. Say hi, Adam.
How's it going? What's up? What's up? I'll be here answering questions. So if you have any questions, Q&A is open. So I'll tee them up for Justin where appropriate. If we can't get to them during this, we'll try to get to them at the end. Of course, reach out to everybody if we can't get to them. And I'll be letting people in. So I'll be here on the sides in the background, just monitoring Q&A.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you, Adam. We do have a small agenda today, so we'll go over that quickly. As you can see, I've already been through at least half of it, or actually more like 95%, because it's going to be primarily demo. So with that, I will begin sharing my screen and we will jump into the demo. So the first flow, we're going to actually be covering 3 different styles of flow today. We're going to kind of start with a simple flow, and then we're going to get to a series of flows actually that are tied together with a life cycle in Tikit. So the first flow, my basic flow that we want to look at is an email connector based flow. And so the idea with this one is when I receive an email, it's going to create a ticket. And it is possible to create a ticket from an email inside of Tikit. That could be from a shared mailbox or from an individual user. But let's say I'm an agent and I want to create a ticket when someone emails me directly. And in this case, that's exactly what we're doing. When I receive an email, and at this point it's any email, it's going to evaluate a condition and it's going to create a ticket. And in this case, I have this condition of from Justin Workman, which is the sender that I've just chosen to hinge on, and I'm Justin Workman. But I just want to illustrate that you can have conditions in flows that kind of direct logic around what's going to happen in that flow. I also will say, though, that it's better to have the condition like this one, for example. You would want that in this flow. So, for example, I have the from here. I can add the same user into this flow. But I did want to just illustrate like that you can have conditions in flows. The reason it's better to have the condition baked into the trigger is because you don't want this necessarily firing on every email. You only want it to fire when your condition is matched. If we were to leave this off and take this out, this trigger is going to fire every time I receive an email into my inbox. And then it's going to evaluate my condition. That's going to make it really hard to manage if this flow goes wrong. Obviously, potentially the flows can get a lot more complex, as we're going to see later. And part of managing flows is the ability to look at these execution histories and see, when something has gone wrong. This is going to load up. Here we go. So this is what those execution histories are going to look like when we have examples of that flow running. But if I have this running every time I receive an email, then that is going to just fill up and it's not going to make any sense. And so again, you can have conditions all throughout your flow, but when you have the ability to stack them inside your trigger, it's best to do that. And so again, this one is going to fire when I receive an email. And then if it's the correct sender, it's going to create a ticket. I just want to show really quick that you can pull anything that comes in higher up in the flow, especially the trigger itself. You can drop any of those properties into the body of an action. This is an action. This is from our Tikit Power Automate connector, but that's what they call it in Power Automate, is an action. And so I'm just pulling the subject out of the email. I'm adding that as the request. I'm attaching the requester's email address from the from. That's who the email came from. And I'm dropping that in the requester email and then setting some additional properties. And in this case, I'm assigning it to Donald Marshall. That's actually who I'm logged in as right now. I'm going to be showing several different user profiles today, so I'll try to show who I am when I'm taking an action, but I just want to illustrate that, again, the scenario here is I'm an agent and I want to create an email, or I want to create a ticket when I receive an email from a specific sender. Now that condition could change, say it's like a particular subject or whatever. Again, this will work either in the external condition or the condition in the trigger itself. But the idea is I, as a regular end user, receive an email, or not as an end user, as an agent, excuse me.
Agent.
I receive an email and I can create a ticket, and then I'm assigning it to myself because it's my ticket, right? I'm going to create that ticket and I want it to come to me. I do want to point out that I have this terminate over here. And again, I don't necessarily want to use this condition, but if I do and I land in this false path, I have this terminate here because it's going to help me again with flow management. When I look at these runs, I'm not going to get a success. If I don't have this terminate here, this flow is just going to terminate successfully. But if I have this terminate action here, I'm setting it to a status of canceled. And even though the flow is basically successfully ending, I'm getting this canceled in my flow execution history, and that lets me know that I hit this condition that I potentially didn't want to hit, and that I might need to update my flow and manage it a little bit better.
Yeah, and certainly like as Justin said, right, the terminate step is not something you necessarily have to do. It's just one of those
Right.
things I think for data cleanliness, right, that you could go back to all of your runs and kind of just quickly visually pick apart the ones that worked and the ones that didn't.
Right. Exactly. I'll actually go ahead and I'll send an email to Donald while we're live, and we should see that ticket come in.
And I think some valid use cases for this, right, apart from like having your own personal email connector for your own inbox. I mean, you can imagine a lot of the conditions where this could sprawl into. So if you send yourself an email, maybe it does something in particular. If it comes from a certain person with a certain department or job title, again, as a condition, maybe it does something else, right? So this can quickly kind of grow in a very organic and natural way. But the point is that like it won't. You're not going to be. It's not going to be perfect out of the gate, right? You're always going to be iterating in this.
Right. That's correct. Yeah. And we'll actually talk about that in a little more depth here in just a moment. You can see this email triggered this flow. If we look at this execution history, we can see we got the green check marks. We received an email, and then we did, in fact, create a ticket. And the ticket action will show the output of what it did. And so if I scroll down here and look at the body, I can see all of the properties of that ticket. Again, that's what was in my subject line that was passed into the title of the email. And I want to just quickly show the ID. So if I go to web, not Wendy's, web.ticket.ai/tickets, and I drop that ID in there, that should be this ticket that we just created based on this email that passed through this. And there we go, we got that email. Okay, so quickly going on to our next scenario, I'm gonna switch to our ticket service account. So it's a best practice to have centralized Power Automate flows so that if an individual leaves an organization and you have them running, your central automation, like I'm about to show in this case, and in my more complex case, and the user leaves that organization, somebody's going to have to break into that account, or somebody's going to have to share all those out and move them around and all of that. It's more of a headache. So really, we recommend having a centralized account to run your Power Automate, especially as it pertains to ticket. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm logged in now as ticket service. And yeah,
the other thing probably worth adding here too is that then all of the actions taken on a ticket in the activity
right.
stream. Yeah, go. Oh, sorry, I don't know. You're in the middle of a drink. Yeah, all the actions in the activity stream are then logged with the ticket service account. So there's a clear delineation between the agents working a ticket and the automation and Power Automate that's working a ticket.
Right, that's right. Yeah. And like, for example, when you see I'll go back over here to Donald. When I look at this flow, when I look at this ticket, we're going to see Donald created this ticket, even though it occurred in Power Automate, but because that flow is running under my Donald Marshall account, that's who actually created this. And so that's what Adam's talking about. When we take an action from the ticket Power Automate connector, it's going to take it as the user that's logged in to Power Automate. And so again, that's why you want to centralize that. And so when you see that action being taken, it makes sense that it's coming from ticket service or whatever your service user is called versus Donald Marshall. It doesn't make sense to have him doing all of this kind of stuff. So again, just a good practice there. Okay, so in this flow, we're going to dynamically assign a ticket based on some selection criteria. So I'm going to actually, as another user, I'm now Henry Hunt, I'm going to fill out a software request form. And the scenario here is I'm going to have a couple of different software titles that this user can pick from, very basic, just for demonstration purposes. They can either pick Adobe or O365, and based on what they select, I want to assign that to a particular user. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this out and create that ticket, and then I'll switch back to the flow. And so the first step is we're going to trigger, again, when a ticket is created. And again, like I talked about in the last flow, we have a condition here, which is the template that's being selected is part of the trigger condition. So I don't want this running every time any ticket is created, only when a software request ticket is created. Again, just making it more manageable and then not having random tickets pass through all this logic that doesn't make sense for that particular process. And then the next thing I'm going to do, as you can see on screen here, is parse JSON. And you might be asking, what is JSON? It's just a syntax that we can use to structure data. And that's, in fact, how we get the card answers. And you can see I have this card answer JSON being passed into that parse JSON activity. It's how we can parse the card answers from the ticket so that we can take action against one of those choices. So if we look at this template definition, you see here are my choices. And again, I want to do one thing if Adobe is selected, and I want to do a different thing if O365 is selected. And the parse JSON is what allows us to pull those pieces out of this card answer JSON property and then be able to take action on them. And I just want to quickly show too that the app name and the reason correspond to the IDs of these input controls. So any input control that you put in a template card has to have an ID. And that part of that is for this reason, because we're going to store those answers, the answer values in a JSON syntax with a key and a value. And in the card answer JSON, the key is the ID of the input control. And so that just gives any mechanism, whether it's Power Automate or Power BI. I know Adam showed the card answer JSON in the Power BI webinar a few weeks ago as well. That just gives us a way to pull that value out based on the ID. Another thing I wanted to point out really quick is how do I generate a schema if I'm going to try to parse these card answers? The easiest way to do that is, like Adam mentioned a while ago, we kind of iterate on our flows. And so if you look at this flow, this is just the same flow that I'm working through here, but it's already run, and this parse JSON is actually set to an empty object, which in JSON is just a pair of curly braces, left and right, open and closed. This is the left and this is the right. But what I can do is when I first am building this flow, I can pass, like a ticket form through this flow. And then that actually allows me to capture what that card answer JSON is going to look like. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to take it over here, and you can see it says use sample payload to generate schema. I'm actually going to wipe out that schema so you can see it be created in real time. And I'm going to paste that payload that I got from that other flow. And when I do that, it generates that schema for me. And so again, now I'm able to select further down in the flow, I'm able to select these properties from my card answer JSON that came from my ticket creation
So,
trigger
so,
payload.
hopefully not to interrupt you too much here, but I noticed that, right, you had a separate flow, right? And getting back to this point of like iterating on these things, you have a separate flow that seemingly its sole purpose is to just capture the JSON payload. So,
That's correct.
so
Yeah,
is it fair
that's
to say
correct.
that you have a flow? I mean, it's fair to say that you have a flow almost for every process you're creating, or you have just one that is like your catch-all for all of them.
Well, I mean, you could take either approach, but what I kind of tend to do is I will start with this flow and then I will build on it. So like I said, I will just build something really basic and then pass a ticket through there. That way I can see the properties that are going to come down. I mean, I can look at what's going to come down in the ticket itself. But I can also look at, again, that card answer JSON and know what I'm going to be working with further down the flow. And so really the way I would say it is start simple and then build out from there. You don't necessarily, I mean, you can have another flow just to capture that. But again, iterate, like go from here to here as you construct. And then you can see what's happening with each successive run of the flow. So the next thing that I want to do in this case is I want to switch. So in the basic flow, we had that kind of if else, if the sender was Justin Workman, do one thing, otherwise do something else, which in that case was terminate. In this case, because it's a drop down, we could have multiple different paths, right? We only have two options at present, but we could have potentially more options. We could have other software titles. So we're going to use a switch rather than a condition, which is just an if else. And furthermore, we want to switch on that app name that was selected by the user, and we want to take a different action based on whatever they select. And so in this case, we're switching on the app name, and I'll just show quickly how that works. Now that I've parsed it with that parse JSON, I can literally just click that in, and now whatever app name was selected, it's going to go down through the switch. And if we have a match, so I'll just jump right into the cases. If we have a match on Adobe, which was one of the options that we have in our dropdown, just to show that again, we have Adobe as a choice. If we match the app name on Adobe, which is just a text, just a string, if that matches, then it's going to go down this path, which you can see the only thing it's going to do is assign to Justin. I'll quickly show that. It's just literally pulling in the ticket ID from the trigger, which is what fired this flow off. And I just dropped that off. Again, you saw me search there. You can search for any property that comes down in through Power Automate in the trigger or in any other action for that matter. And then I'm just assigning it to that user. Again, this is my Adobe person. If I flip over here to O365, the O365 case, Donald is my O365 person, that same ticket ID from the trigger. And then that way we're assigning based on whatever was selected in the ticket submission and through the form, the template form. Another thing I want to point out, you can see that I've renamed these nodes. That's another good practice when you're building flows. This is originally called update a ticket from, again, from the Ticket Power Automate connector. You can just go in here and search for ticket to see all those actions.
Also, slightly new Power Automate layout in the last, several days.
2 days.
Yeah.
But again, so you can just search ticket to see all of the actions that we have available, and then you can click see more to get them all. And again, this is the update a ticket action that I'm using, but you can just click up here and rename it, assign to whoever, and And once again, that's a good practice. I've also renamed these cases. When you add a case, it adds a number if you have multiple. But I've renamed these cases so I know which track is which. And again, just renaming the updated ticket node so that I know what it's doing without having to drill into the node as I'm looking through the flow. Also want to point out with a switch, you have this default case. So let's say I add a new app to my dropdown, not open VPN. But I haven't actually built out a case for that yet. What's going to happen then when it switches on app name? I don't have Adobe or O360, it's not Adobe and it's not O365. It's going to hit this default condition and it's going to assign it to Diego. Now, again, we have the terminate like we had in the first flow, and that's just so we can manage those executions. If we hit that canceled state, we know we've gotten to a place where we don't necessarily want to be. And so that just changing it to canceled makes it a little bit easier to see when we're looking at the history of that flow. Another thing that you could do there,
I was just
rather,
I have to ask though. Sorry, it's like sorry to interrupt, but like, so that when the ticket gets created, those are the cases. I get it. And then if you're else essentially, right? You're in a switch,
right,
but the default logic is assign it to Diego, and then you terminate it. So, yeah, like we've been saying, like it's a way to filter the data. But I'm just thinking, like, why not create a ticket and then provide like an actual feedback loop, so then you don't have to come back to Power Automate to view all that delineation.
right. That's absolutely what you can do. So again, I just searched for ticket in the Power Automate, add an action piece, and then I'm going to provide it the flow has reached default condition. And what's really cool is you can actually pass that app name through. So whatever app name the user selected now will come through on that ticket. And so like Adam just said, when I get that ticket and it's got this stray app name, I know that I need to go and just add a case in here, and I don't have to go digging through the flow executions to find out which one was canceled, and then look back through the history of the flow and find out why. I can just create that flow or create that ticket right here and check that out, and yeah, good to go.
Probably before the terminate, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you could
Yeah.
I would pull
Oh,
out
that's
the
true.
terminate.
Yeah, you don't even. Yeah.
Create a new ticket. I would just pull out the terminate. That's what I would do. Okay, so that was our kind of intermediate flow, and now we're going to get into the little bit more heavy process where it's all going to be tied together by a ticket lifecycle. We have
Just
several
a few things
flows.
happening.
Yeah, just a few. The first thing we'll do actually is we will look at that lifecycle. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an onboarding, a user onboarding. And with that, we're going to create an account. We're going to assign that user to a selected team, again, based on a user selection. And then we're going to, if the user needs an O365 license, we're going to assign them that license. So I'm going to go back over here to my end user. Now I'm Henry Hunt again. And I'm going to submit my new hire request. I'm going to do my user, first name, last name, title. He'll start on the 31st. What team does he need to be a member of? I'm going to say IT, since he's an IT engineer. And then
I don't know if the capital EN there is going to throw off your flow or not.
It's not going to throw off my flow, but it will
Okay.
throw off certain people's certain tendencies. I'm a chronic overshifter. Apologies. And I'm going to say that this user does, in fact, need an O365 license. So I'll submit that. And then again, that was submitted as Henry Hunt, and I'll flip back over here to ticket service, where I'll walk through this life cycle while that's going through. So the first phase of this life cycle is an approval. And part of the reason that I have an approval at the top, I mean, from a business perspective, you could very well need an approval as soon as something is submitted, especially like a new user. You may want someone to approve whatever that may be. But in my case, it's a little more tactical than that, in that the automation that all of the rest of this is going to do, all of the rest of this life cycle, is kind of gated by this approval. So none of this, like create enter account, for example, or teams management or license management, none of that's going to happen without that first approval. So that's a kind of a good practice as well, to, if you're going to have an automation that's going to take action on someone's behalf, you can add an approval step ahead of that, so that that automation doesn't get through without someone else at least looking over it. I mean, you can automate right out of the gate, but again, it's like sometimes it's a good idea to have somebody just kind of look over the data that was entered, validate it, and then the automation can do its thing. So I'll just again quickly go back through that. The approval is the first, and then the second is account creation. And again, we're just going to create and enter account. We're using a Power Automate task and ticket to do that, and that's going to trigger a flow, and I'll show that here when I get into the flows in just a moment. And then the next is assigning that user to a team based on what's selected. And again, when we saw Henry submit that form, he selected the IT team. And then finally, our license assignment, we asked it, does the user need an O365 license? And then this flow is going to kick off and handle that part of the form. So I will go to the first flow, and I will say this flow is actually not represented in that life cycle, but it's going to trigger whenever any onboarding ticket is submitted. And I know I went through this whole song and dance about you need approval before automation kicks off, but this automation is not impactful in the sense that it's not creating user or assigning licenses or anything like that. This is just setting up the ticket. So I don't mind if this runs. In fact, it's going to provide more context for anybody in my organization who might see this ticket. So the first thing is just like the other two, we're going to trigger on when a ticket is created. Again, we're conditioned down to just an onboarding ticket, so it's not firing whenever any random ticket is created. Just like the first one, we're going to do a parse JSON against that card answer JSON. The schema's, got a little bit more, but again, that's because our inputs for this template they're just more of them. And so our schema for this particular flow is just a little bit bigger. Again, you can iterate like we did in the first one, take the first two of these with an empty object for your schema, run that by itself, and then pull that payload out so you can generate that schema. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the approvals in that approval phase. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to update one. But in order to update it, I have to know what I'm updating as it relates to this particular ticket. So I'm getting the approvals. Again, I'm just passing in that ticket ID from the trigger. There's the ticket ID. I'm selecting the life cycle, and in this case, it's my onboarding, and the phase, and in this case, it's the phase, the approval phase, excuse me. And I know that there's only one, but I will say that when the get approvals action runs, it's going to come back with a collection of approvals, even if there's only one. Like I said, I know there's only one approval in this particular phase, but it's still going to come back with a collection. And that's the reason I have this for each here, is it's going to iterate over each approval in the collection that's returned from this get approvals action. And so then the next thing, and I'll just quickly show here too, that the for each is targeting the body value of that approval, the get approvals. And the way I actually did that, I'll show it here so you can see it, is again, just search for ticket. I'm going to add an approval, or actually I'm going to update an approval. And when I put the ticket ID in, or when I select the approval ID from this get approval, so this is the get approvals here, when I select the ID from that, it's actually going to wrap that for me, and it's going to target that body/value, which is the collection of approvals that comes back from that. So Power Automate just does that for me because it knows that this ID is coming from a collection. That's just the way the connector's set up. So I don't need this one, but I just wanted to demonstrate that that's how that works.
Good call
and
out.
so now I have the approval ID of the approval that I'm going to update. And again, I'm just adding some static text here, but I'm also adding some dynamic text. And that is the first name and last name coming from that parse JSON. I'll just quickly show last name coming from the parse JSON. And again, that's the same parse JSON that we did in the other example. And that what this is doing is when my approver, and in this case it's Diego, but when my approver gets this notification about this particular approval, now it's going to have more context. They're going to know who they're approving, you know, the automation to create and license and so forth. And so that's the reason we're doing this. And then the same thing with the ticket. This is the ticket itself. We're triggering again on that ticket ID that came from the trigger. And we're going to rename that ticket onboarding, and then the first name, last name again. So when I'm looking at the grid of tickets, if I'm like wherever the ticket grid is, like if I'm over here looking at my grid of tickets, I can see this is that ticket I submitted, John Smith. I can see what that ticket looks like in the grid, and I know who it is without having to click around and expand the custom form answers and find out who it is. So that's just our setup flow for that ticket. This is before we've even gotten into any of the rest of it. I'm actually going to go ahead and approve. That's Henry. I'm going to approve this when I get to Diego. I'm going to approve this approval so that it can move through the rest of the automation. But just so you can see, we can see that flow ran successfully. It updated the title of this approval. So I know as Diego, I'm Diego now, I know exactly who I'm approving for. I'll go ahead and approve that. Then I'll flip back to ticket service. So again, that was the setup flow. And now we're going to go through this user creation flow. Now this is a different trigger that we used before. You know, we've been using when a ticket is created. Now we're using when a lifecycle Power Automate task becomes active. And again, this has some trigger conditions on it. And in this case, we're selecting the onboarding lifecycle, the account creation phase, and the Power Automate task of create intra account. What's really cool about Power Automate is when I select this lifecycle, I get all the phases that are part of that life cycle. And when I select the correct phase, I can actually have a drop down of the tasks that are associated with that phase. And if we look back at that life cycle really quick, we can see there's just the one Power Automate task, and that's what it's allowing me to select. And so that's what's going to cause this flow to trigger when this becomes active. And I can tell you I can hear the notifications going off. It's like Las Vegas over here. The ticket is just moving through the phases and it's getting automation done. The next step that I'm going to take is I'm going to actually get the ticket, because this trigger is a Power Automate task trigger and not a ticket trigger. I need to actually get the ticket so that I have that card answer JSON. As you can see, the next step, we're going to parse that again so we can get all those details out of that answer. And so I have to actually get that ticket to be able to get that card answer JSON, get the requester, get all of the information that I need. Again, parse JSON, same schema that we used in the last flow. Again, you can all the same stuff that we've already done. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a password. And I thought this was a cool example to show. You can run child flows in a number of different ways in Power Automate. And in this case, this is my get password flow. And I'm actually starting it with a HTTP trigger. Basically, I'm just creating a webhook in Power Automate that when that endpoint is hit, it it does what this flow is supposed to do. It initiates this flow. And so that's exactly what I'm doing in my onboarding. I'm posting a length that I want the password to be, and this flow is processing that length. You can see here, length is in my schema, and it's processing that length and it's providing that password back to me in this flow. And the cool thing about that is I can use that in other flows. Say I'm creating a user in another system, in another flow, I can hit that. But also, if I have any automation on-prem or somewhere else, because it's a web-based action, I can, I can send a payload to this URL from any place on-prem or in the cloud, and it will produce a random password and provide that back to me. Again, just showing a method of running a child flow.
Yeah, I will say on the child flow front, like there's a host of ways to do this. So Justin's illustrating one with webhooks that again are native to Power Automate, but there's also things like Power Automate solutions that there's a host of ways to trigger child flows and kind of modularize. That's the word I'm going with.
Yeah.
Several flows, right? So you can have these distinct pieces that integrate with one another, but also exist independent of one another.
Right. Yep, 100%. So the next step is to actually create the user in Intra. And so again, I'm just passing in the details from the card. If I pop that back in there, you can see first name, last name, male nickname, first name dot last name. There's my password that I got from my my child flow. Creating the user principal name, UPN, with my domain in there. I did first name dot last name and then just threw my domain on the end of it. Given name is first name, surname is last name. In this case, I'm passing in the team. So if we look back at the template, they had the option to select a team. I'm actually going to set that as the department of the user as they're created. And then again, passing the job title, that was on the card. But look here.
And department's just text, right? So you're just going to write the text into the Intra
Right.
profile. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. So whatever was selected here is actually what's going to go into the department of the user as they're created.
So that's also certainly interesting because you're using the text to kind of keep your Intra clean, but you're also using it to drive. I anticipate another flow you're about to get to. Okay. Yeah.
That's
all right.
right.
I'll stop interrupting. I'll let you get to it.
No, you're good. It's a great point though. I mean, because it's something that we see a lot where people might have, kind of fractured data where they may have like HR in their department, or they may have human resources, or, one of those kind of examples. We see that all the time. We're like, people want to automate based on department, for example. They want to, or location or whatever.
Or report on Power BI.
Or report. Yeah. And we're like, well, is your data clean? Is Intra trustworthy? And they're like, nope, not at all. And so if you're standardizing your user creation through automation, then you have a much better chance of having that data be nice and clean and standardized so that you can, yes, report on it and again, automate on it. The next step that we're going to take in this flow now that we've created the user is we're going to update this PA task. This is the one that triggered the flow. We're going to mark it as succeeded so that that phase will transition to the next phase. And then finally, we're going to send an email to the requester that submitted this onboarding. And the biggest key takeaway from that is that we're including that password because, again, somebody's going to have to log into that account. And so we want, go ahead.
And I was going to add, but there's multiple ways you could probably issue that password, right? So however you want to securely choose to share that password could be this action.
Yeah, you could post it on a SharePoint page. New user, new password. Here they are. Everybody, go knock yourself out. Just kidding.
Depends. Yeah.
Just kidding. I would never do that. Nobody would ever do that. But like I said, somebody's going to have to log in with that. And so, yeah, again, the idea here is we're just going to notify, the person that submitted this ticket of what that password is so that they can pass it on to the user when they get started. And actually, I believe if I look at Henry's email, yeah, we could see all of this stuff is happening. But yeah, there's that password. Created this user with that password, and let the user know that that's what's going on. So the next thing, if we look at our life cycle, so we've created the intro account. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a user to a team. So here is that flow. Again, when a Power Automate task becomes active, it's basically the same first 3 steps. We're going to get the ticket because, again, we've got to get the card answers. We've got to get the requester name, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we're going to parse that card answer JSON.
Wonder
And
if you
then
could make
finally,
that
we're
a
going to,
child flow.
you could, yeah, probably. It's possible for sure. The get user activity, we're passing in that UPN. Again, we're just constructing that UPN. It's the same one we constructed in the user creation piece, but that's going to get us the ID, like the actual GUID of that user, as well as any other properties that we might need. Then the next thing you can see is I have a delay. As I was building this process out, I kept getting an unauthorized from this is me adding this user that I've created in the previous flow to a team. I kept getting an unauthorized when I was trying to do this first step here. And it turns out I needed to just wait. This was all happening too soon, too fast, and I needed to just wait for it to happen successfully. And so I've introduced this delay. Again, time delays are not always the best answer, but sometimes you got to just wait. And so Power Automate gives you the ability to just throw a delay in and wait whatever time you might need. And in my case, 20 seconds was sufficient. So again, I'm adding this user to a team. I'm adding it to a company team. I have a team called company, and I want all my users to be in the company team. And so it makes sense to take this opportunity to add them there. I don't have to think about it. Nobody has to manage it. It's just automated and done for me. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch on team, right? If we look this again, we've looked at this a couple times. This one is called teams. This is the choice that we're switching on in this flow now. Whatever team is selected is going to take one of these actions. So if it's IT, which it definitely is in this case, then we're going to assign them to the IT team. Surprise, surprise. If they selected marketing, we're going to add them to the sales and marketing team, and so on and so forth. Again, you could have a default condition here. If you have a team that was added to the template but not added to this Power Automate flow, you might want to create a ticket to go update your flow. I don't have anything in this case, but you could definitely add something here. You definitely should add something there. It's always a good idea to have, if you're using a switch, to have something in the default case, again, just to handle, the unforeseen. We definitely see that. And then again, we are setting the task that triggered this particular flow to succeeded, just to kind of cover that off and let it transition to the next phase. So if we go see what that is, it's going to be license assignment. So we've added the user to a team, we've created the account, and now we're going to assign their license. If I go look at that ticket, this onboarding ticket, it should be stalled out on the on the license assignment piece. I will go ahead and show what that license assignment flow looks like while I wait for that to load. Again, we're triggering on when a lifecycle task becomes active. Again, triggering down on the particular PA task in the particular phase of this particular lifecycle. We're getting the ticket again, just like we did in the other flow, parsing the card answers like we did in the other flow, getting the user like we did in the other flow. But here's where the magic is going to happen. So in this example, this says potentially add user to a licensing group. This is actually the update user action. It's not a group add action. The reason I'm doing it this way is because I have a dynamic group membership rule set up on a intra group. that says if extension attribute 1 or 2 is equal to true or yes, add them to this auto license group. And that auto license group is assigned a Microsoft 365 E5 license. And so in my flow, depending on what choice someone makes to this O365 question, and in our case, the answers are yes or no. If they select yes, that's going to be written to their extension attribute 2, second customizable extension attribute. So if they select yes, it's actually going to trigger that intra group membership rule and add that user to that group, so that they get an O365 license. If it says no, then they're not going to get added to that group. They won't get a license. So this is kind of a cool way of adding users to a group automatically and using your existing intra, automation, using your existing O365 licensing strategy. That's all set up automatically. So I can just write that attribute and that user gets that license.
The other thing also worth adding there is like whether you are doing this as one person, right, managing ticket and intra, or if you're separate teams managing ticket and intra, everyone gets to have their cake and eat it too, right? So if you have these rules in place already in intra, you just kind of continue to take advantage of that logic that is pre-existing.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And then the next thing is one of those external conditions that we started with. And what I wanted to do is if someone is a member of the IT team or the HR team, I have ticket deployed to both of those teams. And so if they're a member of that team, I'm actually going to create a task to go validate ticket licensing for that new user. And I'm going to assign it to my licensing person, which is, surprise, surprise, Justin Workman. So what that's going to do is that's actually going to create a task for me to go actually check licensing. And then finally, I'm going to close out that Power Automate task. And so when this task is completed, the whole ticket is complete. So hopefully we give this a quick refresh.
And that's also interesting because you're, again, as you maybe people on the call know or don't know this, but in Power Automate, you could dynamically add tasks and approvals into an active life cycle with a ticket, currently in motion.
That's right. Yeah. So this as we've seen, this phase is the last phase in my life cycle. And so when that task gets added, yeah, it's added to a phase that's already in motion. So if I check Teams as Justin, the one that gets assigned that task, I should see, yeah, there's my validate ticket license for my new agent, John Smith. Again, that's the title that we constructed in Power Automate to add that dynamic first name, last name to this validation task. So now what I'm going to do is, as Justin, like I said, I'm going to go validate that we have a license or whatever, and I can actually go assign that license to that user. But again, I added a task so that I could do it automatically. I mean, we have an API endpoint for that. You could, run that API through Power Automate and go license that user automatically. But I wanted to show, yes, that you can add a task to a phase that's already in motion, that the task doesn't exist in the template, or excuse me, in the lifecycle definition. So you can actually add tasks, but also like you might want to think about doing that kind of task manually as well. Yes, you can do it automatically, but you may want to have a task for doing that license work manually. So there's John Smith. I can go over here to licenses, and again, I could just like check that off, and now he's licensed. So now he is an agent in Ticket. He's got an O365 license, and he's a member of the proper teams, all based off of submitting a ticket. And I'll actually go complete that task now. And if we go look at that ticket, it should go resolved. I can beat it in a race. Yeah, you can see here that that task is set to completed, and I'll give it one more refresh, and that should be resolved. But again, an end user submitted that form. They need a new user, and we created that user. We assigned it to a team. We assigned them licensing in O365, and again, we added them as an agent to Ticket, um, all nearly automatically, all using Power Automate.
So,
Um,
yeah. So wrapping up, the 3 flows, varying complexity. Justin just did the one on, again, hooking into Ticket, right? So if you're not using Power Automate tasks, life cycles provide a great way and a great conduit to, again, kind of gate and stage your automation, whereas the other two are kind of more built around listening for events in Ticket. I'll let you wrap this up. I won't keep going.
yeah, right. So, like you said, there's multiple different triggers. We have PA task triggers. We have ticket created triggers. We looked at email creation trigger as well. So, there's any kind of trigger you can think of around ticket or email or any other system. I mean, there's SharePoint triggers. There's Excel triggers that can trigger a flow, and then ultimately potentially take action in ticket. So we looked at, like I said, the basic was an email trigger. I want to create a ticket based on a potential sender to my mailbox as an agent. I create that ticket, assign it to myself. And then the other one was I want to do some kind of dynamic assignment, again, with my centrally controlled, managed automation account, not attached to an individual user. I I do that dynamic assignment based on what the user selected. Like in our case, that was an application. They select Adobe, it goes to one user. They select O365, it goes to a different one. And then finally, we did the onboarding where we created the Entra account, created a Teams license or Teams assignment, and then created a license assignment as well by putting them in that dynamic group.
So that said,
Any,
there are. I would say, there are 2 questions, and I said, well, there's one I said I would get to, but I think maybe we have time to do both of these. The first one is from Clint, and this can open up a potential can of worms. So I mean, maybe it could arguably be its own half-hour webinar, debatably. How are you dealing with duplicates for usernames? So,
that is a great question.
Clint, 5 points for the eagle eyes on this one and noticing that one. I
Yeah.
don't know if you can succinctly answer this, Justin. I have a
I
sort
mean,
of base.
yeah, well, I get it. Part of that would depend on like the organizational strategy around that, because some people like to add numbers, some people like to do middle initials, some people, everybody like has their own approach. Yeah, when I'm doing my user creation process in Power Automate, I mean, I would definitely, before I create that user, you could very easily, go look up, whatever name that I'm constructing here, you could look that up. Does that user exist? If yes, then, execute on whatever that strategy is, whether it's middle initial or, adding a number or whatever. But
Yeah, so
you
so
could
you'd have a
do that right here.
you'd have a get user
Yeah,
and then condition out.
exactly.
Or I mean maybe a switch, but or maybe it's another child flow that is handling a
Yeah,
lookup and then iterating what the policy is. So
right.
there's definitely several ways that can go, but certainly doable.
Yeah, and there's an intra get user action. Um, they've rearranged everything, so I'm not finding it right out of the gate. I mean, I used it in another. So here's a fun little thing you can do. You can actually copy an action. So like we're getting this user, you can copy an action and paste it. So again, can paste that action right here. Now I've got a get user. And in fact, it's going to be the same if my parse JSON node is named the same, which this one's not. So I'd have to redo this, but I've got first name dot last name. You get it. You would look up the user, and then like Adam said, based on whatever I get back, if it's I would add a condition. Man, their searching has really gotten worse.
There's another question that came up that
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand. I think I do. I think I get where it's going. But the question is there a way to document steps in Power Automate and also in ticket life cycles? I suspect on the lifecycle side, you're looking for. Well, actually, maybe you should follow up. I don't want to assume too much here. I mean, I guess Justin, speak to the Power Automate side if you can.
I will say I saw, I heard, and in fact, I've actually done it now. I did it yesterday for the first time. I saw a post online where someone said you can export your flow into, if we go like, let me go to one of these other ones, like my setup
Also,
flow, for example.
there's also one other question left with 2 minutes to go. So
Yeah. So if you export this flow to zip, you can drag that zip into ChatGPT and tell it to document this flow. It will analyze that extract and it will actually document the flow. It's amazing.
potentially something we could look at for our OpenAI integration as it exists on Azure and stays within your tenant. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly would love to talk more. If tell you what, let me make a note of this. I will reach out to you so we could discuss this further. And then last question, probably now a minute ago here. If we have already started down the road of using Power Automate for ticket, how easy or hard is it to move the flow management from an individual to a centralized user like ticket service?
Great question. So I'm gonna go to Donald, where I had that individual flow. I'm gonna go back to the kind of flow. Yeah, there's two stages of looking. Well, there's three stages of looking at a flow. There's this screen, there's the edit screen, and then there's like the flow execution, where if I click one of these records, I'm going to see that execution. Those are the kind of the three screens of the flow. But what I can do is where it says co-owners, I can share that, and I can add ticket service here, and then they immediately become a co-owner. I can go to my ticket service account now and go back to my flows, go to shared with me, and it'll show up here. It may take a second, but it'll show up here. And worst case scenario, I can click into that flow and do a save as, and it'll create a brand new flow in my flows as ticket service. And now I've copied that flow and I own it. Go through the flow, change the connections to use ticket service rather than the original user, and you're good to go.
All right, that said, top of the hour. Thanks for coming by, everybody. Much appreciated. Certainly have some follow-ups. I will myself, Justin, will do that. Justin, I'll leave it with you to close it out.
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for showing up. This was fun. If you have questions around Power Automate, like Adam said, reach out to us. Easiest way, help@ticket.ai. If you have needs around this and you want us to come build this for you, don't want to dig in, don't know, don't have time, whatever, let us know. Like I said, that's what I do. I'm on the customer success team delivering services. So if you have a need there, definitely reach out to me, Adam, help@ticket.ai. Thanks again. See you guys.